Daily Cyber Briefing for Thursday, the 13th of June. I'm Stephen Ridgway. Google is warning of actively exploited Pixel firmware zero-day vulnerability. Tracked as CVE 2024 32896. It's an elevation of privilege flaw in the Pixel firmware. It is and amongst that particular one is in amongst a group of 40 security bugs that have been addressed in this month's updates. So if you are using a Pixel device, definitely worth looking for upgrades out at the moment. If you're using other versions of Android, just make sure that you are also keeping on top of updates. They are very important to keep on top of. Obviously, for most things, but Android, given the way that it is distributed, it is not always the Google version that you end up with. You may end up with your own vendor's version. So keeping on top of that is always a good thing. Interesting new phishing campaign has been seen that uses HTML attachments that abuse the Windows search protocol. Search-ms URI, and that is pushing batch files hosted on remote servers that then are used to deliver malware. There's an article in Bleeping Computer that does demonstrate how this works. So there are ways in which you can see how this particular exploit is being crafted and is being used, but it relies on the fact that there's that crossover between well, it's not Internet Explorer anymore, is it? But Internet Explorer and Windows Explorer. So you can search for files in Internet Explorer, and you can search bits of the web using Windows Explorer. That kind of crossover. So it is exploiting the fact that if you are searching for files, the files don't have to be local. They can effectively be linked off to places on the internet. If you combine that with stuff like delivering the file as a zip file, basic malware, anti-malware evasion stuff, you can see that there are ways in which you can get malware downloaded using this particular. Well, it's a feature, I suspect, more than anything else. Worth having a look at. It just goes to show that, again, it is important to make sure you have multi-tiered protection in place and not just rely on endpoint protection. I think it would be fair to say that if you were pushing your internet connections through one of the secure proxy services, Zscaler type things. Not that we're recommending Zscaler particularly, it's one that pops into mind. You would catch a lot of this sort of stuff. If you're relying only on the endpoint, well, it is going to be hit and miss as to whether your endpoint protection suite catches these sorts of things. Anyway, it's certainly worth having a read of the article if you are concerned about this sort of stuff, because there are phishing emails being sent around which, on the face of it, don't look to be particularly convincing, but they are demonstrating how this particular method might work, and it's worth understanding it. There is a cryptojacking campaign currently targeting misconfigured Kubernetes clusters. Article in the Hacker News this time. Again, a good article explaining how this particular vulnerability is being, or this particular exploit is being executed. I don't know. I'm tying myself in knots with that sentence. Never mind. If you're running Kubernetes, of course, it is worth making sure that you are securing your environment in a way that is appropriate to what you're trying to do. For this particular exploit, the initial access is accomplished by targeting externally accessible Kubernetes API servers with anonymous authentication enabled, which is then used to deliver the miner payloads. Now, you might think, who would possibly put a Kubernetes API server with anonymous authentication enabled on the internet? You'd be surprised, I'm sure. So if you are running Kubernetes, then just have a quick check to make sure that things are the way you think they are. Stuff hasn't changed since you last looked, or that particular misconfigurations have just not yet been picked up, because this is being actively targeted at the moment, and will be relatively easy to find. Rockwell Rockwell is a provider of industrial control systems, manufacturer of industrial control systems. It is reminding users at the moment that industrial control systems are being targeted by both criminal groups and nation state groups. They have put out a bulletin saying, unless you need to have these devices on the internet, remove them from the internet, because typically these devices suffer from some inherent weaknesses in their cybersecurity. In fairness to the manufacturers, this stuff was never originally designed to be networked. And also, given the fact that it's industrial control system, it's not the easiest to patch and update, and certainly isn't the easiest to replace if vulnerabilities or whatever crop up. So there is a tendency for things to sit there. If they work, as was the case perhaps 20 years ago in IT, if it's working, don't touch it. Difficulty with that is that if things are being actively targeted, it may be very hard to do anything about that, because we're talking about things, threats against water supplies and power plants, manufacturing, telecom carriers, and so on, that sort of stuff. And they're being targeted by APTs that are well funded and very determined. APTs from China, Russia, Iran, places like that, North Korea, I would guess, as well. It is. I think increasingly we're going to see a focus on both compromising ICS and protecting ICS. It is fair, and the article, again, it's a dark reading article in this case, but it does point out that most ICS gear has no business being online, and I think that's fair. A Shodan search for Rockwell's would return over 7,000 results, though, which does indicate that things are being put online that quite probably don't need to be. Um, so, obviously, if you are actually responsible for this stuff, have a real think around how you're protecting it, because it is being targeted. And also, it is not that you are likely to be knocked over right now, although there is always the possibility of that, but it is always a possibility that once your devices are known to be vulnerable, that they'll be in a list of things that will be disrupted at a later date if the political environment leads some of these other nation states to take those sorts of actions. So it is tricky. It is. I think there's going to be a while before vendors really catch up with how to secure this stuff. And as Rockwell is saying, if it's not meant to be on the internet, don't put it on the internet. If you have got this stuff on the internet, think about how you can protect it, mitigating protections, network segregation, so on and so forth, that you may be able to build in around this. And in the meantime, then just watch out. Finally, from me today, there's an interesting article that is talking again about biometrics. It must be a year, 18 months, probably more, longer ago, that I first began to think about how secure biometric authentication really is. And at one level, you can say, well, yes, okay, it is. It is better. Certainly, if you're comparing it to things like usernames and passwords, well, yes, it probably is better because at least you have to be present if you're biometrics. Well, now there's an interesting question. The article talks about things like, well, you can't steal somebody's face. Well, no, you can't steal somebody's actual face. But could you steal the digital representation of somebody's face in such a way that could be injected into? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's the article involves quotes from somebody who appears to work for a company that is very much delivering biometric authentication solutions, and consequently, of course, say, well, no, of course, the risks are over exaggerated. I'm not entirely sure that they are. I think we don't really understand them properly yet. The one thing that is certain is that if in some way your face or your fingerprint is compromised, you can't change it easily. And that, I think, is the crux of my concerns with these things. So they do argue, well, your face or your fingerprint is not secret. Well, that's also an interesting way to look at this. So that's a weakness of passwords because they're secret, and as soon as the secret is known, the whole thing's blown. Well, and your face isn't secret. Well, yeah, that's kind of true. Well, this is true, but then does that make it a better factor for authentication? I'm not convinced. I think we're going to see an increased focus on how these things can be, how biometric solutions can be compromised, which isn't going to be along the lines of, we'll show it a picture of somebody and hope it works it out kind of thing. I think there's going to be some much more sophisticated stuff around manipulating the digitized version of whatever the biometric authentication token is, be that a face or a fingerprint or whatever it may be. So yeah, it's one thing though which I don't very much agree with here is that voice recognition is a very bad idea as a factor in authentication. It is at the moment very difficult, verging on almost impossible, to detect a deep faked voice because there's not enough information in voice prints to be able to determine fake from real. So yeah, which also then leads on to, of course, how do you know whether the person you're listening to in your podcasts or news or whatever it might be is actually the person that you think you're listening to? Yeah. Oh dear. Here we go then. Right. That's enough from me for today. I hope you all have a good Thursday.